great pleasure to welcome you to the Distinguished Marsh Lecture, which will be given by our Marsh visiting professor, Mark McDonald. This professorship brings eminent journalists to Michigan for a year to teach courses in our department, and it's made possible by the generosity of the Marsh family. We actually have two Marsh endowments that were established by gifts from Howard R. Marsh to support research and teaching in journalism. One endowment supports the professorship, and the other supports the Howard R. Marsh Center. And the center supports the study of long-range problems that affect the ability of the news media to perform their functions in a democratic society. Now, Howard R. Marsh was a journalist and a writer. And several years ago, with the funds from the Marsh Endowment, we were able to bring in James Fallows to speak. And James Fallows, as many of you know, is the national correspondent for the Atlantic Monthly. Well, what we also learned was that James Fallows' father was a good friend of the Marsh family, and in fact was Howard Marsh's personal physician. And so when he came, James Fallows gave us a description of Howard Marsh that I want to share with you. Howard Marsh, according to my dad, was a modest, charming, honorable, friendly, understated man who felt fortunate to have the financial means to support causes he cared about. He wrote popular westerns when that was a big business, and he was a speechwriter for FDR. And then James added, but the real reason there are now Marsh professors, given what we know about journalists' salaries, is that he presciently acquired mineral rights in Southern California. And that area turned out to be extremely valuable. And what is great about this is that Howard Marsh also used that money to establish very important scholarly activities here at the university. Two of Howard Marsh's grandchildren are here today, Susie Winnie and her husband Bill, and Kirby Reinhardt, and I want to thank them and their family for their ongoing generosity to the department, the college, and the university. In addition to all of the things they have supported in our department, they support scholarships here at the university that are deeply appreciated by students, and gifts like theirs have such an enormous and long-lasting impact on Michigan and on its students. So thanks very much to the Marsh family. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Mark McDonald. We hired Mark 2 years ago to be the visiting Marsh professor, and he was so fabulous that we just had to ask him to do it for a second year. The students love Mark's classes, and the parents of the students who take Mark's classes love the classes because Mark makes them read the newspaper. And the parents admire that very much. Mark has been teaching two courses, one on the coverage of war, a conflict and terrorism, which brings an enormous amount of quite fresh and very valuable information into the classroom for our students. And the other is a course on the future of newspapers and journalism. Mark graduated from Kalamazoo with a degree, an honors degree in political science, and then he went to work for the New York Times right after graduating. After 4 years at the Times, he went to the Los Angeles Times, the International Herald Tribune in Paris, sounds like a good posting, the Boston Globe, and then he joined the Night Reader newspapers as a foreign correspondent. Over the years, Mark has won dozens of writing and reporting awards. Mark has been nominated for 4 Pulitzer Prizes, and he worked on a team that won the Pulitzer in 1995. Mark has also spent a year here as a Michigan Journalism Fellow, now known as the Knight Wallace Fellows, a program run by our esteemed colleague Charles Eisendrath. Mark, while he was here, studied Asian politics and international business, and that year in Ann Arbor was the year that fully launched his career as a foreign correspondent. He was Southeast Asia Bureau Chief for Knight Ridder, covering 14 countries from Pakistan to the Philippines. Later, as Bureau Chief in Moscow, Mark divided his time between the former Soviet Union and the Middle East. After 9/11, Mark was deployed to Pakistan and to Afghanistan. He packed for what he thought would be a 3-week assignment and stayed 4 months. He has been to Afghanistan twice and worked a lot as an embedded journalist there. He hasn't been back since 2005 when, and I've heard some of these rather gripping and scary stories, the convoy he was with was ambushed by Taliban fighters. In the lead up to the Iraq War, Mark worked in Jordan, Pakistan, and Turkey, and then he sneaked into the Kurdish part of Iraq in January of 2003, 2 months before the war started. He stayed 6 months that time. And he was embedded with Kurdish and Special Forces troops, but mostly as a unilateral reporter. He has been back to Iraq 3 more times. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Mark McDonald, who will be giving a talk, Embedded, Media at War, covering Iraq and Afghanistan. Please join me in welcoming Mark McDonald.
Thanks, Susan. Thank you. Sorry, I have some microphones I have to hook up here. Strapped in here. Thanks for the kind introduction, Susan. And not only introduction, but also the hospitality and generosity of the department. You and TR have been welcoming and generous to me, and I appreciate it. And I'm hoping to wangle a standing invitation to your single malt party every year. They pour some great scotch at that Douglas household. There's TR back there. It's also great to see some of the students from this year. Give yourselves a hand. And it's the students who have made the 2 years here so much fun and invigorating and rejuvenating for me. So thanks to you guys. When I came here, I thought, oh yeah, being around the students is going to be great. They'll make me feel young. Well, they make me feel twice as old as I am, so thank you for that, too. It's also nice to see some new colleagues and friends from the Knight Wallace Journalism Fellows program, and especially Charles and Julia Eisendrath. Thank you for coming. Charles emboldened me, as Susan said, to change my fat and happy career as a sports writer into foreign correspondency. So I owe him and the program a lot. So Susan, Charles, the program, the university, and my students, I keep resisting the urge to call them my kids because I'm sure they hate that. All of you have been great inspirations to me, and I want to thank you very much for that. I'm already starting to get nostalgic because the semester and my year here are winding down, so if I tear up here, you'll know why. Inspiration has come to me, and I suspect a lot of you, from less predictable sources than our mentors and friends. I've spent a good bit of the last couple years here, last 2 years here, thinking about journalism, war journalism, our democracy, our country, and our foreign policy. And I had something of an epiphany about this the last time I was coming out of Baghdad. I was flying out of Baghdad into Amman, and I was sitting next to a CIA guy who I had gotten to know in Baghdad a little bit, who's a spy. Obviously not a very good one because I knew who he was. And, you know, as men of a certain age do, we started to like trade war stories. It's sort of like showing battle scars and trying to outdo each other. But eventually we fell into talking about music for some reason. And he gave me a CD that he had been listening to on the plane. And it was a CD of James Brown, the great soul singer. It occurred to me that James, who recently passed over, certainly knew a lot about trouble, heartache, and despair. I think he went to prison, he was involved in drugs, divorce, all sorts of heartache. I think at one point he shot his wife's car to death, maybe. Anyway, I'm flying over Anbar province, listening to James and the Fabulous Flames, and it occurred to me that James might have been onto something about foreign policy. And might have some good lessons for our government and other governments also. And he didn't follow his own advice about avoiding trouble, but one of his great lines is, "Don't want none, don't start none." And I thought, forget the grammar, forget the syntax. That's a pretty good foreign policy, yeah? Our country, and a lot of other countries in the world, might be a lot better off if George Bush had listened to James Brown instead of Dick Cheney. Just a theory, just wanted to throw it out there. Don't want none, don't start none. We certainly knew trouble was coming in the fall of 2002. The Bush administration and most of the mainstream media were shifting to war footing, beating the war drums so loudly that any contrasting ideas or information were lost in the noise. In the first weeks of 2003, I found myself circling Iraq, trying to get into the country before the war started. I was in Jordan, Turkey, Pakistan, Turkey, Jordan, all over, trying to offer small bribes to get a visa to go to Iraq. Excuse me, too much lemonade. The problem was the Iraqis wanted large bribes, and we weren't prepared to pay large bribes. So at one point, I just jumped on a bus, sat down on the floor, and sneaked in to the Kurdish area and stayed for 5 months. There weren't very many Americans around at the time, American forces, that is. And whenever I would run into them, these special forces guys, they were not at all happy to see an American reporter. Some other journalists were around also, but we were all basically alone, not embedded, basically on our own. I found a crappy hotel, that's all there were crappy hotels, and bribed the hotel manager, a small bribe again, for a room with heat and hot water, and most importantly, a south-facing window, so my satellite phone would work. I could set up my little dish and have a good satellite signal. The guy took my bribe and said, "Follow me. I have the honeymoon suite for you." So I thought, oh man, I've hit the jackpot, the honeymoon suite. So after the first 2 or 3 frantic weeks of hiring a translator and getting a car and finding maps and doing all the stuff that you need to do to get ready to work, it occurred to me one evening, late at night, that the room hadn't been cleaned. This is 3 or 4 weeks into the deployment. And so I went down the next morning and I asked my new best friend, the hotel manager, if he could send up the maids. And he did. And while I was out, they came and mopped the floors and stripped the beds. And when I came back, they hadn't put the new sheets on the beds. And there's the mattress covered in old blood. So my first thought is, oh God, somebody was murdered in my bed. Previous. Then I thought, oh no, that can't be it. This place was a brothel at one point. I said, no, that's not it. And then finally, sharp as a tack, connecting the dots, it's the honeymoon suite in a Muslim country, virgin brides, and I sent my driver out immediately for a new mattress. So much for the glamorous life of a foreign reporter. I want to tell a couple quick stories about some of my colleagues. Some of these stories will not be flattering, and this is Vegas, so what happens here stays here. Then I want to talk a little bit about the process of embedding, and since that's the title of the speech, it seems appropriate. And then conclude with a few thoughts about how poorly the American media have been covering the war. I'm sure we've all read stories about the looting that followed the invasion. I've certainly written many of them myself. And after the invasion, after all the cities fell, after Saddam's troops withdrew and fell back, the Iraqi people were just absolutely desperate for anything that they could lay their hands on. They took everything in sight. Entire UN food warehouses were emptied within hours. The efficiency with which they emptied these warehouses was phenomenal. And these were warehouses the size of the Pontiac Silverdome. Huge, huge stacks of food, just carted off in a matter of hours. There were no U.S. troops to stop the looting. There was no order for the troops to stop the looting. And in any event, they couldn't have prevented it. They could have had divisions in there and it wouldn't have mattered. I saw the central bank in Mosul, which is the third largest city in the country, cleaned out, burlap sacks full of money pouring out the door. At one point, some guys were trying to get into the main vault at the bank. And they had rigged up a chain of hand grenades to blow the doors off the bank, off the vault, and they set the grenades off and it didn't work. So they went out on the street and got a guy with a rocket launcher to try to blow the doors off, and that didn't work either. I mean, the thing's probably still not open. There was wild looting at Saddam's various palaces also. They took everything that wasn't nailed down, and a lot of stuff that was nailed down. They took floor tiles, wall switches, stair banisters, chandeliers. They took everything they could get their hands on. They pulled up entire floors and carted them off in trucks. They pulled up the plants in the garden and took those. It was astounding. It was just this frenzy of looting. I interviewed a guy who was coming out of one of the palaces with 2 ceramic toilets on his shoulders. And never one to miss an obvious interview. There's got to be a story in this, right? Sir, can I interview you? So he stopped and I talked to him about his toilets. And I said, do you have plumbing in your house? He said, no. I said, well, why are you taking these toilets? Are you going to hook them up somewhere? He says, no, I'm going to use them as chairs. I want to sit where Saddam used to sit. So there were a million stories in the whole looting thing. But what you didn't hear and what we didn't write was the looting that was done by journalists. And it wasn't epidemic, but it certainly did happen. I saw colleagues take crystal ashtrays, ceramic vases, historic artifacts from the museums. A Swiss TV crew backed up its van to one of the palaces, back doors of the palaces, and carted off huge ceramic vases, porcelain vases. I guess I should have written that story. But in the interest of full disclosure, I am here to confess a little looting of my own. And I have my booty here. I took a toilet paper spindle from the bathroom of Saddam's bedroom. And it's not my proudest moment as a journalist, and I'll deny it forever, but every time I go to the bathroom, it gives me a smile. So, full disclosure. Journalists do behave badly and foolishly, and the journalists here certainly are no exceptions because I've seen them at work. And I had a colleague who I often ran into on battlefields during the main fighting of the war. And he and I worked for the same company. He shall go nameless here. Every time we started to get under a mortar attack, or the bombing started, or explosions started to happen, he would call the office in D.C. and say, "Oh, it's really bad out here." I mean, always waited till the bomb started going off. It was very dramatic and very diva, and he made it seem like 88 times as dangerous as it was, but I always thought that was kind of bad behavior. I should name him, but I won't. Now I have a story about Fox News, and I think that might play well here. In my crappy hotel in the honeymoon suite, the floor below me was occupied by Fox News TV crew, and there were about 6 of them. And they decided that because of their political leanings, they would be under attack from Saddam's guys even more than the rest of us. So their security advisor, a former South African mercenary, brought up thousands of sandbags, guys, Iraqi guys, walking them up the stairs, thousands of them, put them around the windows and doors and entryway to the floor, to their floor. At one point, the Fox guys, the Fox engineers, rigged up a satellite on top of the hotel. So we soon began to get Fox News in the hotel in Iraq during a war. I had never seen Fox News because I had been living overseas. And you can imagine my surprise to see this stuff. But it was odd to see it in your hotel room during a war.
It's that guy you didn't name.
It was quite dislocating to be seeing Fox News in the honeymoon suite. Because Fox did have this security advisor, he wouldn't let the reporter and his crew go out to the battlefield. His job was to keep them safe, which meant he had veto power on where they could go. So he refused to let them go to these quite dangerous battlefields that the rest of us were going to every day. So basically, they used their Land Rovers, their fleet of brand new Land Rovers, to tool around town. And a small digression. In Kurdistan, these big white Toyota Land Cruisers, brand new, gleaming, just beautiful cars, they called them Monicas. That was the slang. Because the Kurds were smitten with Monica Lewinsky. And these were big and white and Western and gleaming and full-figured. The Kurds were absolutely smitten with Monica Lewinsky. So they called these cars, admiringly, Monicas. Anyway, that's a digression. Anyway, the Fox guys couldn't go to the battlefield, so they would wait around till the rest of us got back, tired, dirty, frazzled, scared, whatever, and they would debrief us real quickly as we went up to our rooms. So it got to the point that, and I will name this guy, their talent, their on-air guy, is a guy named Chris Klein. And Chris was frustrated because he wouldn't be able to go to the battles. But Chris started doing his live stand-ups back to Fox from his hotel room. And they set up this little set in his hotel room. Sandbags. They turned out all the lights and used one of these, night vision lights, these green lights. He put on his flak jacket and his khakis, put on his helmet. And he'd do his live stand-ups from his hotel room, the floor below me. And I'm sitting in my room trying to write my 1,500 words, and there's Chris looking like he's in a bunker somewhere, when I know very well he's like right below me. I guess I should have called him on it. But I guess I was starting to channel James Brown even at that point, don't want none, don't start none. So it was just awful. 2 Australian photographers I was with, young guys, they couldn't bear it. It just drove them batty. Chris would come on and they would just go ballistic. So finally they figured out a way to get him. when Chris, and this is the great thing, he would whisper. I can't tell you where I am right now for security reasons. It was unconscionable, But, it's safe to say that we're not far from fighting that occurred here today between Kurdish forces in Iraq and Saddam's Republican Guard. I mean, this whole breathless, over the top, whispery, with the green light. I mean, you can imagine, yeah. Anyway, my two Aussie friends, my buddies, had enough of that after 4 or 5 live performances. And so they started to call Chris's room in the hotel. So Chris is, I can't give away my, it's very Geraldo, I can't give away my location, but bring, 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 And strangely, the screen would go to black, and the anchor back in New York or DC would say, oh, we seem to be having some very damaging technical problems. Oh, I hope Chris is okay. One of these photographers is a guy named Ashley Gilbertson. I guess I shouldn't chew ice during my talk, huh? Ashley was and is one of those guys who always gets the picture. He was so good, he went as a freelancer and quickly got a job as a staffer with the New York Times, staff photographer. Ashley was with a Marine unit in Fallujah, and he wanted to go up a minaret to get a different kind of picture, a different angle for a picture. Well, this minaret had a sniper in it, and the Marines thought they had cleared the sniper, that is, killed the sniper. And Ashley, good photographer that he is, sort of started to charge up the minaret, and a sergeant, I think it was a sergeant, grabbed him and said, no, I have to go first. And they argued about it. The sergeant prevailed. So the sergeant goes up the staircase with Ashley, the spiral staircase, with Ashley right behind him. They get to the top of the stairs. Well, the sniper hadn't been killed. He shot the sergeant in the face, blowing his skull and brains all over Ashley's face. Ashley, obviously, has not been the same since. He rotated back to the States soon after that. He got plenty of rest, got some counseling, drank a lot, got married, had some shows, some photo shows, and has been working on a book about his experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan. But he still feels guilty about this sergeant being killed. Inappropriate guilt, we all can acknowledge, but for him, it's real. And it's part of the stress that soldiers obviously go through, and too many journalists go through as well. We see the same stuff when we're out there. Lots of us suffer from, and I'm not one of them, thank God, suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. They come back to the world, they drink too much, they distance themselves from their friends and their family, they don't sleep, they have a really short temper, they have a high startle response, so if somebody drops something or some unexpected noise, they're easily startled. They get divorced, they weep at the weirdest, oddest times and things. Basically, they don't fit when they come back. We don't hear this much about journalists. We hear it a lot. We're hearing it a lot more and more about soldiers. And this PTSD comes from mostly witnessing all this violence and trauma and horrifying stuff. And they see all this stuff because of embedding, this new program. And most of you, pardon me for describing this briefly, but those of you who don't know it, embedding is this relatively new practice of journalists being attached to combat units. You become part of the unit, you join the unit, you travel with them. They provide you food, water, transport, and obviously some measure of security, safety. And it has been a rapidly accepted and fine-tuned program. It started at the end of the Afghan War, the conventional fighting of the Afghan War, and became a full-blown program during the Iraq War. We, as journalists, agree not to betray operational details, troop movements, troop levels, that kind of stuff. And some of our work is subject to censorship. I've never seen anything censored. Some of the other journalists who've worked in Iraq may have seen that. Nor have I ever seen a case of where a journalist intentionally violated the agreement. It seems to work pretty well. During the Gulf War, there was no embedding. And as I said, just in the Afghan War, that's when it started to be institutionalized, I guess. The Pentagon said, we want the journalists to get real information. We want to get them up close so they get the story right. This is something we're doing for the journalists, for the press. And he made it sound like they just sort of thought it up on the fly. That, yeah, we've had a lot of pressure, so we're going to let the reporters and photographers go with the troops. Nothing could be farther from the truth. They planned this in incredible detail. They war-gamed embedding. They ran war games on it at the Army War College. This was not some, let's run it up the flagpole and see if it flies. This was absolutely a programmed program. The more cynical view is that they wanted reporters close to the troops, not to help the journalists get the story right. They wanted to co-opt the journalists, keep them close to their countrymen, create this bonding situation so we would pull our punches if punches needed to be pulled. You know the phrase, keep your friends close and your enemies closer? That was a perfect description of the embedding, the reasons behind the embedding program. And make no mistake, the Pentagon and the White House obviously view the press as an enemy. Unfortunately for them, fortunately for us, the program worked and has worked quite well. Which is not to say it's not with its downsides, because embed and embed can be the same sometimes. 16 days out in the boondocks, under fire, no showers, everybody's dirty, crappy cold food, credible danger. Bonding happens. It just does. There's no way around it. You speak the same language, you come from the same towns. A 19-year-old kid gets shot in front of you. You feel sad about it. It's just natural. This bonding happens. One guy I know from the Orange County paper went to Afghanistan and was embedded and wrote about my Marines, completely crossing the line from objectivity to subjectivity. It just happens. Now, Jim McMillan, a new friend of mine, and a journalism fellow this year, won a Pulitzer Prize for photography, worked in Iraq extensively. He's been embedded, and his strategy for fixing this bonding, when he felt it starting to happen, if he felt it himself starting to get too close to the troops, really simple strategy. You move. You change units. You switch from the 4th Infantry Division to the 3rd Marines. You feel yourself getting too close to the guys, and you move. So, it's a great program, and the downsides can be avoided. I've spent a little bit of time about embedding because it's truly the only way to cover Iraq now. And I use the word cover in the loosest possible terms. It's the only way to even get around the country. Getting into the country is difficult. And the safest way, which is not to say safe, is to go to Kuwait, wait for an embed assignment, and you ride in with fresh U.S. troops. It used to be you could fly in from Amman, back and forth. And that was nerve-wracking because you would approach Baghdad and you would start these long, slow circles down to the landing strip. Now, my theory is, hey, let's get this baby on the ground. What are we circling for? Come on. There's not that much traffic. Let's get on the ground. But apparently, and somebody explained the physics of this to me once, and I still don't get it. The slow circles confuse the missiles from the ground. So, that being said, it still scares the hell out of you as you're making these slow circles down to Baghdad airport. Anyway, the safe way is to ride in now with U.S. troops. It's impossible to work on your own or venture out on your own. You cannot just go out and do the normal work of reporters. It's just not possible. It's too dangerous. It used to be, back in the glory days of 2003, when we were supposed to be greeted as liberators and having flowers thrown at our feet, you could come up on a checkpoint, and hold your hands up out the car window and say, "Sahafi, Sahafi," journalist. And they would just wave you through. Now you yell Sahafi and they kill you, kidnap you, or cut your head off. It's not safe anymore. There's no way to cover the news there. The networks sit inside the green zone, this fortified Camelot in the middle of Baghdad. The reporters, the TV guys, TV camera people, they don't go out. They hand out hundreds of these mini DV cameras to Iraqis. A bomb goes off, a car blows up, 20 bodies are found beheaded in a ditch. The local guys, the local people, are taking these home movies, really. Then they bring the tape back to the NBC or CBS people, CNN people, inside the green zone, and they make a package or a story out of it, or they uplink it to New York, where it's edited and put together. Is that journalism? I don't know. I don't think so. That's Chris Klein journalism, It's just impossibly dangerous now. So, we don't hear enough of the good stories. Well, you don't hear enough of the bad stories either, because you just can't get out and cover them. This brings me to the final piece of the talk. Roberta, how am I doing? 5 minutes? We'll do some Q&A after, so I'll try to hurry. Why has it taken so long for the American public to wake up or recognize why Iraq is so awful and horrific? Reporters and photographers know it's been chaotic since the summer of 2003, late summer. We knew there was going to be a terrible endgame. Lots of us predicted the Civil War. But no newspapers or no major newspapers or TV networks have said this loudly, clearly, and bluntly. It's taken us 4 years and how many days? 3 days? To sort of come to the realization that it's a bloody mess. And I still don't think people know how bad it is. Now, part of this is, of course, White House spin. Yeah? Cut and run. The insurgency is in its death throes. They're just a bunch of dead-enders. All this bumper sticker nonsense that we heard out of the administration. White House advisor Dan Bartlett said, as recently as December, we're winning the war. Now, it's just a parallel reality. What we were seeing on the ground as journalists Classic insurgency tactics, asymmetric warfare, infiltration of the police and the army, suicide bombing, sectarian violence, beheading, fighters hiding among and behind civilians, kidnappings, true acts of terrorism. But much of the blame, in my view, and maybe I've buried the lead on this talk, much of the blame should be laid at the feet of the mainstream media. I love newspapers. I hope they never die. I hope to die with ink on my hands. I've never worked for anybody but a newspaper, except for Susan. They're too important to the country and the democracy, and I know this is sounding lofty, but it's absolutely something I've become convinced of in the last 2 years. How else will we know about the despair of Katrina, the horrors at Abu Ghraib, illegal wiretapping, Walter Reed, rendition, secret prisons, the list, come on, the list is on and on. Does anybody in this room think that the government's going to tell us about this stuff? And isn't that the largest lesson we take from the war? The real takeaway from this war is that the government is not in the truth-telling business. As far as I can tell, it never has been. But this is a reaffirmation, an affirmation of that sad fact. Now, cynics might say, well, the same thing can be said about the press. You know, they're not in the real truth-telling business. And sometimes I agree with them. At no point have we clearly been told how truly awful it is in Iraq. I just think the press pulls its punches, especially newspapers, pulls its punches too often. We don't see the wounded unless they're the Iraqis or the bad guys. We don't see and didn't see the political cartoons that so enraged the Muslim world last year. We don't read obscenity-laced comments from soldiers, our soldiers, because that's not supporting the troops. We don't read about cowardice. We don't read about desertion. We don't read about self-inflicted wounds so soldiers can be sent home. But the information is out there. And it's part of this new revolution in journalism is just happening, just starting to happen. It's incredibly interesting and exciting time for journalists now. And citizens too, I think. And I know my students are going to roll their eyes at this because I've been beating their brains out about it for 3 semesters. Just as we live in a world of asymmetric warfare, we live in a world of asymmetric journalism. Thank you. That will be reflected positively in your grades. I've run out of time. Asymmetric journalism, the whole new world. Soldier blogs, never happened before. Ever, never, ever. It's all enabled by the internet. A trooper can be at a firefight at noon, and they can be blogging about it back in the States by dinner time. Never, ever happened before. Arab TV, Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya. Hell, the U.S. government has its own Arab language stations now. Cell phones, live calls from the battlefield. Hey, honey, I'm getting mortared. Cell phone pictures, Saddam's hanging on video, Abu Ghraib, the pictures from Abu Ghraib. YouTube, what a phenomenon that is. The bad guys are making their own videos, and where do they end up? They end up on YouTube. Beheadings, sure, they're there. You talk about asymmetric information, that's where it is. It's on the internet. Recruiting, jihadis, it's on the internet, on the terrorist websites. They have their own websites, for God's sake. Terrorists have their own blogs. I think I'm the only person on earth without a blog. Journalist blogs, Defense Department blogs, aid workers. How about this? Cockpit videos. Anybody see that? American fighter plane blew up a British convoy and killed a British soldier. The video and the audio from the cockpit were on the internet. Friendly fire accident. It's incredible. We've never had anything close to like this big, huge batch of information that we have now. Foreign newspapers in English on the internet from all over the world. The information is there. There are piles of it, but almost none of it makes it into our newspapers, magazines, and our TV screens. So I charge the owners, the publishers, and the managers of big newspapers and TV stations with cowardice. Maybe that's too strong a word. Again, my students know that you say maybe means exactly the same as maybe not. Maybe dishonesty is a better word, or war weariness. In any event, newspaper bosses, the people who run newspapers, don't want to be bothered by your phone calls. They don't want to have to lose you as a reader. So they pull their punches. They confuse the words offending and offensive. Anybody who's offended, that means that something in the newspaper was offensive. Dead Somalis on the battlefield, perfectly identifiable. A3, New York Times today. Dead Somali. Brown skin, foreigner, who cares? You would never, ever see a dead American boy or woman, girl, trooper, in the pages of the New York Times. Certainly not on the front page. Not even inside. Just wouldn't happen. Why? People would be offended. People would drop their subscriptions. Newspapers need to stand up, be offending, be offensive maybe sometimes, and damn the loss of readership. If we lose half the newspapers in America, the other half will be great, and we can live with that. But this pablum that we're getting now is doing us no good. It doesn't tell us quickly enough how awful the situation in Iraq and Afghanistan have been. I'm getting the high sign. I still have a few rants left, but I'll stop here and take a few questions. Do I have time? Yes.
Are you taking questions?
Yes, I am.
Can you comment on the prisoner exchange with the Italian journalist and the Afghanistan prisoners?
She asked. Sorry, there's a switch here somewhere. How's that? How's that? Can you hear me? She asked about the exchange yesterday for one Italian journalist and 5 Taliban fighters, done by the Italian government. Bad precedent? Probably, yeah. I'm sure the Bushies are upset. They're probably low-level Taliban guys. They wouldn't let any big fish go. But it may, and I'm channeling Dick Cheney here, that emboldens the terrorists. It emboldens them to kidnap people. So I think it's a bad move. Just my opinion. Yes.
I was just interested in this Fox Newsman, Chris. Where was he getting the information that he was communicating to the people?
Where was Chris getting all the info that he didn't collect at the battlefield? He would sort of grab it in the lobby from us as we were going to our rooms. Like,
Okay.
28 dead, 37 wounded, this unit, those kind of basic details.
Okay, thank you.
Come on, a student must have a question. Yes, sir.
I have a question about the supporting our troops. And in your experience and with your colleagues, do you think it's true that the soldiers who are on the ground in Iraq today feel that if our Congress should put a timeline on our continued involvement, that they would feel abandoned or that we would not be supporting them?
Yeah, that's a really good question, whether troopers on the ground now would feel abandoned or let down by the resolutions that are trying to make their way through Congress about funding. I wish I could answer, but I haven't been there, so I don't know how they feel now. They don't think kindly about Congress, for sure, in my experience, and they certainly don't feel kindly toward the press. I think Jim had really good relations with the guys he was embedded with, and I did also, until the stories came out. And they hated the stories. They always hated the stories. I was embedded in Afghanistan. This was right after Abu Ghraib, and the rules of engagement for missions had changed. There was no more bagging of prisoners, no more, putting their heads in a bag when they were captured. Well, sure enough, in this mission out in the boondocks, they came upon 3 guys, captured them. They claimed that these shepherds basically had been shooting at them. So I come upon the scene about 2 minutes later, and these guys are down on the ground, face down, with bags on their heads. And the mission commander had told me specifically, he brought it up, that prisoners were not to be bagged. Now, this is a danger of embedding, or it can be. I had been with these guys for 14 days, was nowhere to go. I was stuck with them, they were stuck with me. We got along great. But here I saw a clear violation of the rules. So, what do I do as a journalist? Do I just stand back and then write about it later? Or do I interject myself into the story and say, hey, what the hell is this? And these guys were starting to suffocate. They were squirming around. So, as a journalist, what do? Well, I think I probably made the wrong decision, because I got the commander, a young captain, who I was riding in his Humvee. I pulled him aside and I said, Brian, if you don't take these bags off these guys' heads, I'm going to have to write about it. So I had gotten too close. I was in bed. I wasn't embedded anymore. He took the bags off. He said, oh, God, I didn't even notice. Yeah, oh, my fault. Oh, that's awful. And I didn't write about it. And I always, in the back of my mind, think I should have. It didn't fit the story, but I probably should have written about it. And I crossed the line. But that's the danger that can come with embedding sometimes. So I've wandered away a far piece from your question, but that was in my mind to tell that story anyway. So thanks. Tina.
So if Baghdad and Iraq is in general too dangerous for journalists to travel about, and I kind of agree with you that I don't know whether the network's sending DVD cameras out with the local journalism or not, but is there a way to objectively get that information, or is that just information lost?
There is a way of getting objective information if you're not on the street. It's not ideal, but one way we figured out is to train up a bunch of reporters, local folks, to be reporters. And impromptu journalists, basically. Yeah, they don't have years of experience. They haven't worked in newsrooms or TV stations or on magazine staffs. But they want to get out. They're the only ones who can get out. And we have, at Knight Ridder, we have an incredible crew of Iraqi journalists. One of whom was a MD, a doctor, who was killed while working on a story for us. He came up on a checkpoint and held his hands up, and they shot his car up, blew him away. They thought he was a suicide bomber. It's not easy. It's not perfect, but you find ways around it. Still not good. Still awful. We don't have any idea of how bad it is. Stacy?
What do you see yourself doing differently if you return to journalism, having had time off as a witness to now?
Desk job. 2 words, desk job. I don't know. That's a good question, and I didn't plant that, actually. I do have to look for a job, so anybody who owns a newspaper here, please let me know. Yes?
Mark, what do we have to do to get the counter Harvard to give you tenure?
That was a planted question. Please see Susan Douglas at length after this talk. Yes?
It wasn't clear to us who blew up the journalist doctor.
American troopers. Yeah. And to be fair, it's a tough situation. Any car can be a rolling bomb. These guys have to, and women, have to make these instantaneous decisions. It's just an impossible situation. It's just impossible. Martha Raddatz from ABC describes a battle in an alley. And American guys are backed up at the back of an alley. They have nowhere to go, no escape. And foreign fighters, presumably foreign fighters, are coming at them down the alley with a whole crowd of kids in front of them. And the foreign fighters are pushing them along, shooting over the heads of the kids. Now, the American guys have nowhere to go. What do? Do they shoot the kids, shoot at the crowd to kill the fighters, or what? It's impossible situations like this every single day. It's just awful, just awful. Tony.
I do. You mentioned Martha Raddatz. Who are the journalists that you like? I know you don't like Fox, but I mean, the ones that you do like, especially television.
I like Richard Engel a lot from NBC. And he's one of those guys who has had a little, or has hinted himself about some of this super stress that he's under. He lost his marriage. His marriage went south on him. Feels completely committed to the story. He speaks Arabic. I think he does really nice work. Tony, it's hard to say because it's all kind of bad, It's all not as good as we want. I really think Annie Garrels does some great things on NPR. Full disclosure, she's a friend of mine, so the NPR people do courageous work under tough circumstances, too.
Care to give a guess of what the legacy will be of Iraq?
The legacy of Iraq? Well, I think, two things come to mind really quickly. The main benefactor of the war in Iraq is Iran. They've won the war. Iran has won the Iraq war. The other thing that really troubles me is that we won't be able to fight another war easily, and we might have to. Because we have an unjust war, that's going to make the next war twice as hard to sell. And if we do come upon a situation where we do have to go to war, it may not be so easy, and we may suffer the consequences. Just traveling around the world, a lot of you, most of you, probably travel all over the world. You can certainly see the reaction that foreigners have to you now. It's not like it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. I find when I go overseas now, just as a tourist, I do a lot of explaining and a lot of apologizing. And I apologize to you if I've bored you too much. Thank you very much for coming.